Caillou challenge. This one's called Heads and Legs. They bring up a apparently common problem that people are supposed to learn in school. I did not have this problem in school, but they tell of a farm with chickens and cows. Basically, they give us a number of heads and a number of legs passed in as a parameter, and we're supposed to deduce how many cows and chickens are involved to come up with that many heads and legs. And of course, the difference being that a cow would have 4 legs and a chicken has 2 legs. They do limit our input here, so notice that x and y are less than or equal to 1,000. This is important because your algorithm doesn't need to be very performant. You'll be just fine, right, with input restricted on such a small level. In real life, we might have millions or billions of inputs, right? So that's when algorithms and efficiency matters. But for here, which I'm actually going to step through, is just a brute force sort of solution. Step through it and figure out the answer. That often happens. This is very much, I know some people don't like these. They think they're more math questions than programming questions, and that's a fair complaint. But that's sort of what we do with programming, right? So we better embrace it. Anyway, if you continue to read the description, they'll note how you should handle some edge cases. There's something going on here that I don't like very much, and that I particularly don't like in an 8 Caillou, an absolute beginner challenge, this idea where we're going to return an object. So I'm going to describe some things. If they don't make sense to you at this level, don't worry about it. I'm offering it to those who maybe do have a little bit more familiarity. But object basically is a type that is so generic it describes basically everything. Integers, all the types that strings that you can imagine all sort of inheriting from this overly super generic object class, right? That's sort of the base of what we call object-oriented programming. I don't recommend doing this when you make methods. Don't make methods that return generic objects so you can, sometimes return a string that says something and then other times return an array of integer values. You know what I mean? That's very ugly in my opinion. So I don't recommend doing that. But that's what we have to do here, and so I'm going to work within the parameters I have, right? Sometimes we have to do that, right? We work with other people in real life, and we don't necessarily get to pick our parameters or our design, and we have to work within those constraints. So let's do that here. Anyways, yeah, I typically don't read the whole description for you. I respect you all enough that you can all do that, but I do like to point out the important points here. And since I think I've done that, let's get on to coding. You know what to do. Pause the video here, have a go at it, and then resume me when you're ready to get into the solution. So to start, I'm going to do what's common. We're going to handle sort of those edge cases, those trivial cases, as we like to call them, where we sort of intercept them before we get into any real processing. I will do some processing eventually to try to figure out the number of cows and chickens, but in these cases like they bring up where it's, if 0 heads and 0 legs are given, just return 0 and 0. I don't need to calculate anything, right? Like the answer's it's just there by definition. So to handle something like that, I'm going to say if heads equals to 0 and legs equals to 0, I can simply be done with all of this, and I'm going to return a new integer of array of 0, 0. That's exactly what they told me to do in the description here, right? Hopefully that's clear. There's no work that needs to be done in that case. Finally, they also describe some scenarios where it doesn't make sense, like if they give us too many legs where there's no combination of chickens and cows that can account for any legs. Like if they gave me 2 heads and 1,000 legs, right? There's no chicken or cow that, with only 2 of them that's going to account for that. We're told to just immediately return this no solution. So If I were to basically try to express what I said in code, it could look something like, and they address negative values as well, which are nonsensical. So you could say something like, if heads is less than 0 or legs is less than 0, right? Those would be nonsense. Or the case where you have too many legs, so I'll say if the legs amount is greater than the heads times 4, because that would be the most, right? Like cows would have, imagine all cows, right? If cows can't account for the number of legs, then there's no way to get there, right? Because chickens have even less legs. So that's sort of how I'm checking to make sure that the legs is even reachable. In that case, this is supposed to cover my situations like that. I'm going to type out the string no solutions. Okay, so we've covered some of those nonsensical or trivial cases, and now we sort of get into the meat of the function where we'll try to figure out what's going on here. Again, I'm just going to, I'm sure there's many clever mathy ways to solve a lot of these problems that we encounter. I'm just going to go through, let's brute force it, right? Because sometimes you won't always know what the math trick is, right? But you still have a job to do, and you still have to get something that works. And in this case, like I brought up with the input being limited to 1,000, even if you do have a very clean, quick math solution, it's really not going to perform all that better, because not within this limited input set, right? Even if I go through every scenario with such a small input, a computer's going to be able to blaze through that, no problem. So with that said, let's just do brute force, right? Like I'm deciding, I'm going to set up variables to sort of track the number of cows, the number of chickens, and the number of legs. And so I'm going to assume all cows to start, right? The maximum number of cows, and I'm going to sort of step down by 1 each time. I'm going to find the corresponding number of chickens that would make the total number of legs we're looking for, and see when we can find a match. So let me code some to try to make that a little more clear. I could say int num cows would be equal to the amount of legs they passed in divided by 4, right? This would assume that there were only cows at play, right? Because I just took the total legs. I'm just pretending there's no chickens. This would be the scenario where cows is at a maximum, right? Again, I'll maintain a count of chickens. For now, I'm just going to start with 0, right? Because I assumed all cows, so I'm going to say there's no chickens in all cows. And then, of course, the number of legs would be the num cows times 4, because each cow has 4 legs, plus the num chickens times 2. Hopefully that's clear, right? Cows have 4 legs, chickens have 2. If you watched other videos of mine, sometimes we call these constants magic numbers, right? And we'd set up constants to represent them. So instead of using the actual number 4, I could set up in this class a private static integer, num cow legs, or you know, how many legs cows have, whatever. Num legs per cow, right? And I could set it equal to 4, and then I could just reference that variable here instead. You're certainly welcome to do that if you want to try to do this in like a best practice way. Okay. And so like I said, now I kind of want to step through. I want to start with max cows and sort of decrement by 1 each time, and see if I can hit that target legs value, if there is a solution to be had. So we're going to use our friend the while loop, which will just keep executing until its conditions are violated. So we give conditions to the while loop to run. When they're no longer true, then it finally breaks out of these enclosing braces here. But you can imagine whatever I type in here now is going to keep repeating until those conditions are no longer valid. So when do we want to stop processing? Well, let's set this up. Num cows num cows is greater than or equal to 0, and num cows plus num chickens is less than the heads. Okay. And then while we're in this loop, we said we're going to sort of decrement the number of cows. We're going to update our count of chickens, right? Because we need to get that legs count. And so we'll handle this. Just bear with me for a minute. And then we're going to update num legs. Now, I could put all the logic to get the corresponding chicken count, but to try not to bloat the size of my method, I decided to just make a helper method to handle that. So, to that end, I'll say private static int. I'm just creating a method here. I'm making it private. That's the access modifier because it doesn't need to be called anywhere else. It's just like a internal helper method for me. Static is required in this case because this method here is static. If you don't believe me, just take out the static keyword and you should get an error when you run it, but that's why I set it up that way. And then give it a name. Call it num chickens needed, given a number of cows. You could say cows or num cows, however you want to say that, and int a target legs number. And so for this helper method, I'll just tell it, I'll feed in how many cows I have, how many legs I'm looking for, and it will figure out how many chickens correspond to that. So to do that, I could say int cow legs equals cows times 4. You could say num chicken legs equals the legs minus the number of cow legs, right? We're taking the total and we're subtracting how many of those legs are already assigned to cows, right? That's all I'm doing here. And you don't have to make a separate line here if you don't want to. I'm just really trying to do this by the numbers so people can see it. And then finally, you can return num chicken legs divided by 2, right? Because each chicken has 2 legs. Remember, I'm looking for the number of chickens, not the number of chicken legs. I want a count of cows and a count of chickens, because ultimately that's what we have to return, right? Is assuming there is a solution, I'm returning this integer array with a chicken count and a cow count. So this is just what I'd call a helper method to sort of, for each step through my while loop, it's going to give me the corresponding number of chickens. So now I can say num chickens needed, and pass in your current cow count, num cows, and the total number of legs for this problem, right? And then we sort of, this part here, we're just updating the number of legs, because remember the while loop is going to keep executing, right? So I've always got to update my values here. So to do that, it's the same thing. Num cows times 4 legs per cow, plus num chickens by 2. And I don't use any parentheses here just because of order of operations. It knows to multiply in this case before addition. Multiplication happens first. But if you weren't sure, you can enclose these in parentheses. When in doubt, use the parentheses. You can try running without them to make sure you get the results you expect. Or these behaviors are documented online if you want to see in what order operators execute. But anyway, we got our helper method. We're back to basically looping through. We started with the cows sort of being at the max value. We add this clause to greater than or equal to 0 because we don't want the number of cows to dip below 0, right? We don't want to process that. We want to terminate. We don't care if we get down to 0. If we span the whole range, right, from the maximum possible down to 0, there's nothing else to check, right? So the big catch with while loops is that you have to give it a way to terminate. Otherwise, you get stuck in a Stack Overflow, an infinite loop, we call that. And it's very common, especially with beginners, but it happens to everybody. We write code that ends in infinite loops, and you'll get a Stack Overflow. So, provided we have our good exit condition there, and then, yeah, num cows plus number of chickens, we wouldn't want to exceed the total number of heads because that wouldn't make sense either. And then finally, once we exit that, means we've scanned through either all of the possible combinations of values or the number of cows, every possible one with their corresponding chicken count. Then we can finally return, right? We may break out of here early if we find the answer right away, or it may exhaust all the way down until cows gets to 0, in which case maybe a solution wasn't found. But finally, we've got to return what we get if num legs equals legs. And, well, actually, maybe I'll do this first so you can see it. This problem's really quirky with all the weird edge cases and stuff, so you'll see why this won't quite work, but we'll clean it up to work. I'm just going to say return num chickens. That's what they asked for first if you look at the description. And num cows. So this shouldn't quite work, but hopefully it gets us started. By the way, let's add some kind of a statement, because this is how we debug in here. If you had an integrated development environment, or an IDE as we call it, we could step through our program and watch variables change in real time. But on Code Wars here, this is kind of an artificial environment. So we use these print statements that will give us information while the program's running. So we could put in here num cows, num chickens. So remember, these variable values are going to be used in place of their variable names because I use this $sign. This is a special operation here. So everything I enclose in these braces will use the variable's value instead of that actual text. And you'll see this when it runs. And then maybe I'll say num legs, something. Whatever information, whatever variables you want to see, just go ahead and type in there. So let's test this and see what we get. Okay, error. Okay, so the name console does not exist. Of course, console, there's no class here named console, right? So I either have to refer to that library, or it has to be something that I created. So if you add using the system namespace, that will bring in console. This is something built into C#. You can refer to the Microsoft docs to believe that. If you've seen my challenges before, you've seen me using system. But using is just pulling in, it's providing a reference to this system namespace where console is defined. Just like in our file, we've got a class called kata, right? So that's all that's doing. Test. Okay, so look at this. We hit some green. We got some right. You can see how our examples went, hopefully as we expected. Passed. But we failed on these invalid number tests. There was one with 0 cows and 12 chickens. And you can see sometimes these error messages are kind of cryptic, right? We wish they would tell something a little more clear. So you kind of have to read between the lines a little bit. Let's go into this red. It expected a n, but was 12. So the 12 we see probably correspond to the chickens, right, which came first in our integer array right here. So you can see it's kind of accessing the first element of whatever thing was returned. And remember how silly this is, in my opinion, because we're returning an object, which is a really nondescript thing. So I'm sorry for an 8 challenge, this is not ideal, but we'll bear with it. But clearly they were looking for no solutions. I take the n to be like the n and no solutions. They wanted that here. So that's why you kind of saw me to start. I was going to add some conditions here. just to make sure our output was valid. So we could say we only want to return the array if we have a desirable outcome. If num legs equals legs, I'm going to try to catch it all here. If num cows is greater than or equal to 0, and num chickens is greater than or equal to 0, then we'll return this. And otherwise, we don't even have to say else, right? Because there's a return statement with our if. So I'm not even going to bother. Sometimes you'll see newer people write an else here, but they're, if the if was true, it just returns. So I don't need to do that. Otherwise, I'll say return no solutions. Okay, and that cleaned everything up. So again, that was so awkward with using an object here. Please don't do this when you make methods return object. Don't do that. But that was just our test. I won't claim victory yet. We'll hit the attempt. They run a few extra tests. And so we did fail. Let's see what we did now. Oops. Random tests. Expected values differ at index 0. Expected 1, what was 3? Cows 4, what did we hit wrong here? Number of legs. Give me a minute. I'm going to make sure I did this right. Less than heads. Okay, that looks right. Cows. Yeah, that looks good. One thing I noticed that I missed here, I think I should put if legs is less than or equal to 0. I don't know that that would change this, but something. Oh, wow, that did do it. Let me do that again. What? That's... I can't say I quite understand. Now it will say it passed and let me submit. Well, I don't have a good explanation for you for that, but it's happy now, and I think this solution is okay. So I'm not too concerned about it. Kind of surprised it blew up before, and I didn't quite make sense of what they gave us. So I'm not going to stress about that. We'll leave it. One thing I do recommend when you're all done, clean up, get rid of these print statements. They don't do anything but just help us, right? They just slow the program down. Otherwise, they're just kind of bloat. So we'll get rid of that before we submit. Otherwise, yeah. Like I said, don't worry if you didn't understand all the concepts. I wouldn't introduce static at 8 Caillou. Certainly not returning objects and sometimes returning integer arrays and sometimes strings. But hey, you're going to be introduced to all this stuff, so why not now, right? Stay with me. It will become more clear. Otherwise, I'm going to fire this off. I hope it was clear what I did. Handle your trivial cases first. Finally, I just set up a scenario where I assumed I was going to start with the max number of cows, check every possible value, walk it all the way down to 0 cows, get a corresponding chicken count associated with the cows, see if the legs matches the target value. If it does, you're done, and simply return the number of chickens and the number of cows. Otherwise, no solutions. So I will leave it at that. They're going to make us attempt again because I modified the code. That's okay. I'll go ahead and submit. You know what to do. Check other people's solutions. See what you can get from them. See, like, they got some nice, really short solutions here. This is a good check right here, right? It's just seeing if the legs value is even. It's ensuring that. If it's odd, there's no way to come up with it, right? Because every healthy chicken and cow has an even number of legs. There's no way to add a bunch of even numbers and come out with an odd, right? So this is a really good check to do. And so you can find smarter math solutions than what I did. But hopefully you found some utility in what I did for those scenarios where you won't come up with the the clever math solution, and you need to kind of power through and step through all the possibilities. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. It's good to be back. Wow, okay. This person was doing a little art here. A little distracted. I don't recommend that. Anyways, as usual, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.